Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you are tuning in from, and welcome to today's discussion on proving return on events. My name is Brandon Raffleson, and in case we haven't met yet, I am the head of editorial at Bizzabo and the host of the In-Person podcast, and I will be introducing today's discussion. Now, the team here at Bizzabo is positively thrilled to be co-producing this event with our partner, Socialive. For those of you who don't know, Socialive is an enterprise video creation platform and a tool that Bizzabo customers use as part of their event tech stack. In fact, this event right now is currently being produced on both Socialive and Bizzabo technology. Now, both Bizzabo and Socialive's tools help event marketers achieve and demonstrate return on event, so it's only fitting that we're collaborating and bringing this session to you all today. Now, we're going to walk through three sections on proving return, or ROE, return on event. First, we'll talk about some of the lessons that our panelists learned from this last year. Next, we'll talk about some of the business models that event organizers can embrace as we enter into this hybrid era where both virtual and in-person experiences are on the table. Finally, we'll discuss different tactics for extending the value of our event programs, whether they be virtual or in-person, in this next era. Now, before we dive into that discussion, just a few housekeeping items to review. Number one, you may be on mute right now and the panelists won't be able to hear you. I can't hear you, but by all means, this session is meant to be interactive. We'll be pausing throughout the session to answer questions that you submitted through the registration process, or to answer questions that you're submitting live throughout the discussion by using the Bizzabo Q&A panel. You can find that Q&A tool just on the right side of your video player. So please, we encourage you to participate in the discussion. If you have any technical questions related to the experiencing of this event today, please reach out to our support team using the chat widget in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You can use that for any support-related questions. And then again, for any questions related to the content, use the Bizzabo Q&A tool on the right-hand side of the screen. Now, finally, this session is being recorded, and you will have the opportunity to access that recording following today's event if you'd like to share it with your colleagues or to review it in the future at some point. We'll be emailing that recording alongside a event feedback survey, and we really hope you'll fill that out so that we can make conversations like this even more impactful for you all moving forward. Okay, lots of housekeeping, lots of information at the top. I'm gonna do us all a favor and introduce our speakers and let them dive into the conversation. So first, we have Sarah Reed, the Senior Director of Global Strategic Events over at Zendesk. Sarah curates experiences that heavily promote optimistic relationships, whether that be with customers, colleagues, or the world itself. Next, we have Jessica Vogel, Vice President of Marketing over at Movable Ink. Jessica leads a team responsible for all global performance marketing activities, including demand generation, ABM, partner, client, content, and events marketing. Finally, rounding out our panel of speakers and here to guide today's conversation is Socialive founder and CEO, David Marica. Before Socialive, David developed and launched Scholastic's first digital learning platform and worked as a strategy consultant at McKinsey & Company. David, thrilled to be collaborating with you and the Socialive team on making today's discussion possible. And I want to extend a hearty welcome to all of our panelists. David?
Thank you, Brandon. What an amazing introduction. And we here at Socialive are equally excited to be working with Bizzabo and your great events platform and great team. We have amazing panelists here with Sarah Reed and Jessica Vogel. And thank you everyone out there for joining us. As Brandon mentioned, we really want to make this interactive, so very Q&A style. So let's get this started very quickly. It has been a very interesting 15 months, to say the least, in the events world. And the way we're starting to measure ROI and ROE is changing dramatically. So, I think to start, we're going to jump into a first question on lessons learned over the last year as we move from physical to virtual, and now as we're beginning to shift to hybrid even. So the first question is submitted from Tanya, who is a VP of marketing in the finance sector. And Tanya asks, have you seen the ROI change as you move from physical to virtual events over the last year? Let's start with you, Sarah.
Well, the short answer is absolutely. The much longer answer is we certainly saw ROI with our digital events just honestly take off in a way that we weren't anticipating. We really approached virtual with a very new lens. We didn't do what a lot of our peers in the industry did. And what I mean by that is we totally shied away from the big multi-day online conferences. We didn't jump into virtual sponsorships and virtual exhibition halls. And so we experimented with a lot of formats. So it took us a little while to sort of figure out what that ROI was. But once we've gotten this far into it, we've totally seen the success. Our event registration and attendance is up about 75% across the globe. Costs are down, pipeline is up, and all of that has shown us an ROI increase of over 400% year over year. So I'm going to say it's working for us.
And Jessica, what would you add to this?
Yeah, I think, we're still working out the way that we think about and measure ROI in this virtual event landscape. I think that we've definitely seen successes from our program so far. As Sarah mentioned, virtual events are much less expensive to produce, both from the experiential side and then the costs associated with having teams travel. We definitely feel very strongly about the metrics that we want to influence, whether that's connecting with our audience more frequently, driving new conversations and pipelines. So I'll say still a work in progress as far as how we can, I can't give a great number on the percentage of revenue increase, but we feel really strongly and, plan to continue to invest in these programs based on the success we've seen so far.
So that's really interesting. So the ROI is being proven. The next question I have for you is, well, now that you started to see the ROI there, how are you thinking about evolving your business models as you produce more virtual events in the year ahead? Why don't we start with you, Jessica?
Yeah, so I think in the past, we had a number of roadshow series that we produced, as well as our annual conferences. What we actually looked at after what we saw in 2020 around, the appetite for people to network and engage, we increased our frequency to over 50 events in 2021. So Some of these are much smaller, more intimate events. Some of these will be larger. But since we're not traveling, we had the flexibility to really expand and test 4 or 5 or 6 different types of events, whereas in the past we really had to prioritize like what was most urgent with the limited team size that we had.
And Sarah, would you add anything on this particular topic?
We too had, I would say, way too many events going into 2020 and certainly through the year. Like most people who are listening today, you probably ran into the same thing where everyone with a Zoom account in your company could suddenly produce an event. And we had to start putting some pretty stringent parameters around what actually quantified an event, because we were doing so many and reaching so many of our customers and our audience multiple ways throughout a month and a quarter that candidly it started to get a little confusing for them because we were inviting everyone to everything. And so one of the things that we quickly recognized is we had to put in an events council, and it allowed us to have a little bit of governance around, why do you do an event? What is the true purpose? Why does it matter? And who is it truly for? And that allowed us to really scale back on the number of events that we did and better segment them. And we did the segmentation both by geography and by purpose and content. And that really helped us get a clear intent on each one of those events. And by the time 2020 came to an end, I would say we not perfected it, but we were certainly in a better off place than how we had entered the year. I think we were down like 24% year over year for the number of events, which was great because those that we did do, we essentially doubled in size. So we did fewer events and reached more people.
So amazing lessons learned. And how, as you're looking forward, how are you thinking about, frequency of events and scale of events? Bigger, smaller, more frequent, less frequent, now that you have those lessons learned. Yeah, Sarah, why don't you start?
Well, we really focus on 3 large events each quarter that get pushed out globally. And so we create these, we call them event kits. So at headquarters, we pull together all the assets from all the marketing, the content, the creative, anything that someone in a field or in a region could take and produce their own events. And we do, as I mentioned, roughly 3 large ones each quarter. And then we have trailing webinars or trailing smaller events that come off of that. And that's where, like Jessica was actually talking about earlier, you take in more of a roadshow fashion, you take bits and pieces of those larger events and you push them out so that you can reach more of your audience in very particular regions.
Yeah, super interesting. And what about you, Jessica? Are you finding kind of any changes moving forward in how you're thinking about frequency events as well as kind of the scale and size of events?
Yeah, I think that really where we find we need to start, as Sarah said, she did with her event council and we do with our events team, is who is our audience and what is the purpose? And that, for everything else can flow from there, right? Are we presenting content to them? How long is it? How many people are going to be there? I think that that's really one of the ways that we've just, tried to start with why, like Simon Sinek says, but what are we trying to achieve? And then that helps us decide. We do have some larger events. Our conference last year, we had over 2,000 registrations, but I think, for the most part, we want to make sure that however we can, we're enabling people to still kind of connect and have conversations and meet other people, because otherwise it is just, it's a webinar if there's not that event aspect to it.
Yeah, super interesting. Socialive, we play a lot in really the content side of things. And one thing we've seen as we're kind of getting into the event side is there seems to be more cross collaboration between the marketing departments. Some of the traditional silos are starting to break down. I'd love to hear from you, Jessica, on whether you're seeing the same thing at Movable Ink. Are the marketing teams working more closely together in this kind of virtual event environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say, as I'm sure many of the event pros that are listening to this, I did have a very extroverted events team and marketing team. So when we were all in the office together, it was always easy to kind of pop your head up and ask someone a question or share something that we had heard at an event. But I've seen more collaboration across my team than ever before. It does require a little bit more process and more meetings sometimes than we'd expect, or figuring out the best tools and ways to have conversations. But I think that collaboration is happening just incredibly well. And we'll talk about this later, but not just with what the event experience is, but how do we give more life to the content afterwards?
Got it. And Sarah, what are you seeing at Zendesk on this topic?
Completely agree with Jessica. I used to, it was a little disheartening sometimes in the past life, the pre-pandemic, that events almost ran in parallel to all the other marketing efforts. Like we were a huge execution arm of the content, but it wasn't always very integrated into those global campaigns. And now during the pandemic, we started working very, very closely with our integrated marketing and our campaigns team. And we now work lockstep with them so that all the events that we create in a quarter should tie into that campaign theme. And we've seen such great success with that. And it's also, I would say, the other place where we've really started working very closely is just with all the other employees in the company. Our employee advocacy now has just gone through the roof. In the past, employees couldn't really take part in our events unless they were working them in some capacity. And now employees really feel like they're part of the whole event experience. And they want to contribute. They want to share the content. They get it out on social, and they feel much more invested, which has been a really great side benefit that we weren't anticipating.
This is super interesting, and I think it kind of segues into another discussion topic, which is what is a virtual event, what is a webinar, what is a town hall? This breakdown of kind of how we kind of talk about these different digital experiences. How would you differentiate between webinars and virtual events in this new virtual world? Is there a difference? Jessica, let's start with you.
I like to think about the litmus test being, is there any difference in experience if this person attended live versus on demand? And if it's the exact same experience across the board, that's not an event, that's a webinar. And that's still a great and important tactic, but I think there needs to be something that, you have to attend live to experience that's what makes something a virtual event for us.
Yeah, I'm gonna follow suit with Jessica. I think there's so much overlap these days because it is all through this format of our laptops. But if you're able to give that little bit of extra, it oftentimes that's how we're classifying it as an event. Or if it's happening in multiple regions. So if we're taking that content and we're distributing it out across, all of our regions simultaneously, that's really where we feel like that becomes an event and less of a webinar.
That makes sense. And it's actually a great segue to an audience question from Michelle. And Michelle is suggesting something that we all know, which is Zoom fatigue. We're in meeting after virtual meeting after virtual meeting, which can tire us out. Do you have any thoughts of how do you increase attendance and engagement in these virtual event environments?
A lot of it for us is engaging well before and then during and after. And so it's, we're experimenting with things like sending out boxes of activities that go along with the event itself. And so last quarter, for example, we did an event in partnership with Pop-Up Magazine, and we sent out a story box. And so for each one of the stories that was presented in the event, there was an item in that box that correlated to it so that it could, and we saw that really drive engagement because people wanted to truly understand what was in that box and how it connected now to the event itself. And so that's one. It's certainly logistically challenging in a lot of ways, but it proved its worth on the other side. We're also seeing things like sending out homework or sending out challenge questions, things that we want you to start thinking about.
Pre-engagement.
Exactly. And if you already have that in your brain of, I want to hear this expert respond to my challenge, and the only way that I could do that is if I attend live, that is going to create significantly more engagement.
Yeah, I agree. Sending people things, beyond them understanding that we've done a lot of different tastings and, concerts where we'd send out snacks or beer from a local vendor. You also make people feel more guilty if they don't show up, if they got something at their house. So
that's a great
play with the emotions a little bit.
Use whatever you can. Yeah. All right, we're going to move to the next section. That was great. Now we're going to talk about budgeting and business cases for the hybrid era. So there's a lot of talk about this move to hybrid. And, let's discuss how you're applying those lessons learned during the virtual only or virtual first, the year to this new hybrid era. And the first question is actually submitted from Carolyn. Carolyn is an event marketing manager. It's a great question. She's kind of like trying to understand, how do you look at the ROE of a hybrid event versus kind of a virtual event? Is it, the same cost, essentially 2 events that you need to spend for? How do you think about this and kind of measuring ROE and ROI in kind of this hybrid era? I'll start with Jessica here.
Cool. So I think for us, for the most part, when we think about a hybrid event strategy, especially going into 2022, that's going to be some events are virtual and some events are in person. But having said that, we have drawn a line in the sand and are hosting our annual conference in person, June of 2022, and have started to look at the costs there. I think that the best and the most that you can do is try to understand as many as the upfront costs as possible to really decide what's most important. Is live streaming mission critical, or can you deliver that content the next day? Thinking about accessibility, things like captioning. I think that if you want to effectively produce an experience that is amazing in person and is amazing digitally, it's definitely going to start to inch towards, budgeting for 2 completely different events. And I think it's just really important to prioritize which elements for each are most important.
And Sarah, I think you talk a lot about like a hub and spoke model. Can you share a little bit about that? I thought it was really interesting.
Now, keep in mind, we have not implemented this yet. So while it seems super interesting, at least on paper and in theory, we haven't had an opportunity to execute it yet because we haven't made that decision yet on when we're going to go back into physical events. But the way that we're thinking about this is that the virtual, we plan to be digital first, at least through 2022 and probably into 23. And by that, we mean the hub is going to be that digital experience. And that's where the majority of those big ticket items that we used to spend at a physical event are going to be. That's where the keynotes are, where the celebrity conversations, where the things that candidly, you don't need to do in person. We've proven that we can show our keynotes in a digital format and that people are interested in them. And we really don't know that we're going to go back to big hotel ballrooms and convention centers and things like that anymore. So we'll do that in a digital experience. And then the spokes are those hyper local opportunities for people to get together in person and do those things that Jessica was talking about that you just can't replicate virtually. That's the networking, that's the demos, that's the spending time, with your salespeople, with your peers. And we're looking for more just purposeful ways for those people to get together and truly understand why. And I also just want to point out that there was a lot of waste in our physical events, and we spent so much money on beautiful things that just got tossed out at the end of an event. I mean, I know all of us have had that tearful moment of watching things get ripped off the wall and just, balled up and thrown in a corner at the end of an event. And you're like, do you know how many months and money it took for us to create these beautiful things? And so we're looking at possibly reducing our spend in order to be more mindful and sustainable. And so that's another good reason for us to be virtual first.
Yeah, so many great insights on this whole kind of idea of what hybrid really is, how quickly we need to move back to physical, how kind of the two work with each other. I'd actually like to extend that a little bit and talk a little bit about like how do you create the right engagement experience between the virtual audience and the physical audience, and do they need to be connected in some way? I'd love to hear how you're thinking about that. And Sarah, maybe you can start. I know you're not going back to physical quite yet, but if you're thinking ahead to that.
We are, and we think it's going to be an interplay between the physical and digital. They have to be two different productions, though. That's, I think, what's really important. And we've talked about this before, where your audience is never going to think of this as a hybrid experience. They are thinking, am I going to a digital event or am I going to a physical event? And so in a lot of ways, what we're going to do, again, is we're going to be inviting people to that digital experience. And some people may never do the physical. They will only live in that digital environment. And then we're also going to have that spoke of the physical. And those individuals are probably going to think of that as a second event and not some, hybrid amalgamation of the two. And so we know that we can engage in this digital experience in the way that we have. Now it's just extending that to certain parts of our audience in the physical space.
Jessica, anything you want to talk about in terms of how you're thinking about the engagement between the two audiences?
Yeah, I think that what our early learnings have started to show us is, especially in this time that we've all been at home for the past year, people really want community and that to be extended after the event. So even though, let's say at a virtual or at an in-person or hybrid conference, I might not be networking with someone who is at home on their laptop, but if we are both, part of a community, whether that's Slack or LinkedIn or other tools that extend the conversation past the event, I think that that's where the most opportunity is. We've tried to, even before COVID, use fun things like AR filters and other digital touch points so that potentially on social media during the conference, people were engaging or, through an event app. But I think that that's going to be, as Sarah said, none of us have really done this yet. So I think that that's going to be a really fun experiment to see, like, what is there an appetite for? And, if I finally get to a room full of people, probably the last thing that I want is to get back on my computer and communicate that way.
You're so spot on.
We're going to talk a little bit about like snackable video and kind of post-event snackable video. But, we have some great questions from the audience, which we're going to move to now. And reminder, please put those questions in that Bizzabo chat. We want your questions and make it as interactive as possible. I've got a great and very specific question from Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is thinking about a hybrid event. She's trying to get a sense of how do you start budgeting for AV, food and beverage, et cetera, around this hybrid event. Do you have any sense yet of how your models that you're using to project out costs for those two types of things? And Jessica, since you guys are more aggressively looking at some hybrid events, can we start with you?
Sure. So I think that if we look at building a budget, obviously one of the biggest things that we always planned for in the past was the cost per attendee. And that cost per attendee wasn't just the food and beverage, the hard costs that actually every time you added a person increased. But I think that that's really where we would think about splitting the budget. So for the in-person experience, what's the cost per attendee that we're planning for, whether that's gifts, decor, everything. And then for the virtual aspect of the event, you don't need to as closely look at the cost per attendee overall. So that's really where there's an opportunity to scale as much as you possibly can. So when I've started to at least think about how we're building our budgets for next year, it is kind of with those two different models of what do I want to spend for every single person that's here. I feel like $500, whatever the number is a premium in-person experience. And then separately thinking about what are the table stakes that I need to make sure that I have a production crew. I need to have live streaming technology. I want to make sure that this is captioned. Those are kind of the two buckets that I think that you can bring together. And then if you decide that you want to optimize more for in-person, it's kind of a seesaw of how you want to balance that budget there.
And Sarah, are you starting to think about this yet? I mean, you're starting to obviously share some things to folks who are in the virtual event from an F&B perspective. You want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I don't know if there's too much more to add than what Jessica's already described. The only other thing that I would even mention is utilize your production partners really wisely and get them starting to think about like where you're going to go, what potential, like how many people are you thinking about having in these in your physical events, and have them also be able to budget out the parallel of the digital experience. We think it's going to be important to have one agency that can make those connections for you so that you aren't getting these disparate experiences. And then from an in-house perspective, we're also looking at executive producers internally who can do a physical and then they have a partner to the virtual. And so there is a little bit of an extra cost there, of course, since we're asking, for two people to work that event in a way than one, but it's going to pay off in the long run.
Fantastic. So we have a pre-submitted question from Lauren, which I think is a great one. It's and Jessica, if you've done any hybrid events, what has worked and what hasn't, or has it worked, broadly speaking? And then, more broadly for Sarah, what concerns you the most about hybrid events? So we'll go in order there.
Yeah, I mean, we have not yet returned to anything in person yet. We have our line in the sand for next year, but unfortunately not there yet.
So what concerns you the most?
Well, I'll give you a real world right now experience. I was just chatting with one of our speakers bureaus down in Australia last night, and she was talking about how they are already back in hybrid in-person events in Australia, but they're about to go into a 5-day lockdown in Melbourne starting today. And so she's like, I now have to pivot all of these in-person events. She's like, I have 3 in-person events next week that now I have to like move out. And so that's scary, right? As event planners, because we put so much time and energy into these things. And we're now talking about putting this back out in the physical space, but there are still so many unknowns, and we can't control what happens where and why at this point in time. And so to have that additional stress is what really scares me right now.
And I think even before that, definitely, I would agree, it's a huge stressor. And then even leading up to that, we had asked our clients 2 questions in a survey. One was, what's your appetite to go back to in-person events? And then one was, what do you think that your company's appetite is in terms of budgeting for travel and those types of things? And even those people who were very excited to get back to an in-person weren't sure whether their companies would fund that travel yet. So I think even planning for, it will be more difficult to have kind of, if I invite 1,000 people, then I expect that this many will purchase tickets and this many will attend, because I think all of those ratios are going to be changing too, with the changing factors in the world and people's comfort levels. And so, yeah, I think it's the unknown overall that for me.
Absolutely. And what you just described is something that we talk about at Zendesk on probably the daily basis, where individuals are all excited to go back, but their companies aren't necessarily excited to send them. They don't want that liability. And by the way, they've also recognized that their employees have been able to go to these digital events all last year without taking any time off, without spending any travel, without any loss of productivity and work. And they've still gotten the experience and the education that they needed. So I think we are going to see companies slow roll that travel and that desire to send their teams.
It just really feels like we're going to be in a digital first mindset. And I don't know if that will ever change at this point, which is very interesting. But one final question in this section, which is, and I'm going to start with you, Jessica, on this. You had talked about this a little bit, but should the experience and content experience for the physical event be kind of segmented from the virtual experience, or should it be at the same time? What are your thoughts on that?
I like the idea in theory, we'll say, of having at least those keynotes, those key pieces of content happen simultaneously. When we ran a virtual conference, we did some raffles and some, Wellness Wednesdays and experiences to try to incentivize people to join live. But I think that it's important to I'd like to have everyone experience the event at the same time, but make that content extensible and, help curate. Like, you weren't able to join live. And so these are the top 3 sessions that we think will be of interest for you.
And what are you thinking about this particular topic, Sarah? Do you think they should be together?
I think it's going to depend, because not every event is going to be structured the exact same way either. And that's one thing. We're all going to have to keep taking these risks. We're going to have to experiment with formats to see really what audiences are interested in and, what's really feasible, right? Like, we keep talking about these theoretical things and we're like, well, I believe it will work. But until we start experimenting, and I do believe our audience is going to give us a bit of a break, because they're so eager to want and to do and to see us all again in person, that there are going to be some reprieves. But the way that we envision it too is that it would be fantastic if those big keynote experiences are experienced by a large number of people, because there is something about also that camaraderie and watching and experimenting and experiencing the same thing at the same time. It creates an energy, it creates a buzz, right? So if we can do that and then have you go off and do those in-person spoke experiences that we talked about, or as Jessica described, having it on demand so that people can go back and they can watch it at their leisure. Absolutely. We want that, we want that content to live on.
Sarah, one of the things you just said, I know we have another section to move to, but was that the audience is going to give us a little bit of a reprieve. I think that that's the case. When we've been thinking about events, we've talked about maybe this is going to be more like an in-studio experience, like you're at Good Morning America and you hear the director saying cut, and it feels a little bit more behind the scenes, even though you're in person. I think that that's another, again, something that we are thinking about experimenting with too, where it still feels polished, but you're kind of getting to see some of the work that goes into it when you're in person.
I love that so much because it's actually now what we've all become accustomed to, right? We just had this conversation earlier in the green room where it's like, there are kids that walk in and the dogs start barking. And there's a realism to our events in a way that I would say in the past, we were almost mortified if something like fell through or if there was like you actually saw behind the scenes.
Yeah, or like the mic stopped working. Oh my God.
The presentation has stopped, and so we were so good at mitigating those things, and now we're almost recognizing that we don't need to. Like we can let that humanity actually get out there.
It's so true. I mean, this whole notion of like authenticity and showing kind of the human face of the brand, whether you're talking to employees or you're talking to customers, like the data is out there that shows that really like audiences engage better when you're authentic. And it's been shown in social marketing. It's been shown even in demand gen. And so just to see that kind of come through to events that, yes, we want to be on brand, we want to be polished, but it's okay if we're authentic. It's okay if we're not perfect, right? I just think that's a really interesting, thing to wrap our arms around because it's real. Awesome. So we're going to move to the next section, which is really talking about how do we show ROI kind of post-event? How do we extend the value of our event experience? And I'm going to start with you, Sarah, particularly when it comes to content and kind of tying into, lead gen and other aspects of your funnel. Like, how are you able to kind of extend the value of your event beyond the event itself, whether it be virtual or in the future hybrid?
It's such a great question because for any of us who are content creators, one of our biggest frustrations is this misnomer that just because you've put that content out once, that everybody has seen it. And we know that's not the case. And creating brand new content for every single event and for every region, one, it's exhausting, and two, it's just unnecessary. So what I love now about this digital world is that we're able to distill down this great content that we're creating, and we're making these 60, 90-second bits where we can put that out on social media. We can entice people to come and watch the long form version. We also put our content out on YouTube channels. And we encourage people to, we have different series. Like I run a CX Moment series once a month where I get to interview great executives and of our customers and partners. And that's a really well watched YouTube channel now. And you can go to and watch things at your leisure. And then we're doing an event in Q3 where it's all modular content. And so I'm creating 20 pieces of very short form, less than 10-minute content. And you can either watch it on a hub on demand, or we'll give you the opportunity to watch it in the agenda format that we think is best in a couple of events. But you don't have to. You don't have to watch it in that way. You can get it in whatever mechanism now that you choose. And I expect that'll keep going, whether we're physical or not.
Jessica,
yeah, I think sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to agree with what Sarah said. I think that really giving your attendees or the people that weren't able to attend the option, sometimes they want to watch video, sometimes they want to watch it in a shorter form. We've tested doing different things as written case studies or blog posts, and really creating those different formats. There's such strong stories that are, that we hear from our customers at our events, and it's a waste when the only people that get to see it are the people that were live in the room. So we've really, tried to do that as well, creating different formats. And then we've tried to enable our internal teams as much as we can around, these were all of the speakers, these were the industries, this is a quick tidbit, and really just help them use that in their outreach to their audiences too. And I think that touching people where they are, whether that's on Slack or that's over email or that's on YouTube, that's what we've had to think about a lot more. But I think that that's an important lesson that we've learned, for in-person events too in the future.
And I want to ask a question more broadly around content. Are you thinking about the content of your events differently in this era than you were, and really being more selective around the content given kind of the digital nature of it? I'd love to hear from you guys on that. So I don't know if Jessica, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, I think, it really depends on the type of event that we're doing. One of the series that we run is for marketing executives. And so we don't do any presentation. Those events are typically very targeted to what the group actually wants to talk about. So we have a team that does a lot of research and can speak to, what's happening within retail and travel, but we do a quick pre-event survey and we let that guide what's most important and what we want to talk about. Sometimes things shift. I mentioned this when I spoke to Brandon on the podcast, but someone once said, this was like marketing therapy. So I think that sometimes that dictates what the content is. And then, there are some events where we try to have more repeatable modules and the stories are more similar from event to event.
And I don't know if I'm thinking about it differently, but I do recognize that I have a little less control over how someone is watching the content now. Where in a large, in-person event, everything was very orchestrated, right? I wanted to make sure it wasn't two panels back to back, or I wanted to ensure that the graphics on screen were marrying up beautifully with what was happening on stage, and that was also going to happen for that entire segment of time that you were in that particular room. And so there was a lot more coordination, I think, around the aesthetics of the content as well, where now, yes, if I'm putting out an event, I certainly make sure that from an agenda perspective, it isn't 3 panels back to back, and that I'm incorporating live as well as pre-recorded. But then with everything on demand, you get to choose how you watch it. And even though I can make suggestions, you may not follow my suggestions. And so I've lost a bit of that production control.
And I think that the narrative sometimes at a virtual event is different than how in person you can say they're going to hear this keynote, then they're going to hear this product thing, and you have that sequential order. Whereas, if they're viewing things on demand or they're popping in and out, everything does need to stand on its own a little bit better.
Agreed.
And that actually, we're going to get to audience questions here in just a minute, but as a segue into that, what are you finding in terms of what folks are watching? Are they generally watching the long form content after the event, or is short kind of snackable 30 to 90 second videos on key themes and topics playing out for you? What are you seeing there? And Sarah, maybe you kick us off.
Yeah, I would say right now it's under 10 minutes of content.
Okay.
Is people are willing to invest that amount of time. And we're even seeing that with the longest, I do interviews that stretch out to maybe 30 minutes. And while people will watch that live, it's really challenging to get someone to then go back and on demand watch full 30-minute of an interview, unless it's around a very specific topic or a person that they're so interested in. So I do think we're creating much more bite-sized content. And that also, as Jessica was talking about, in the different formats, a lot of it does have to stand on its own too, that you don't have to watch it. It can be something I just listen to, and I'm still going to get everything that I need out of it without staring at the 5 people in the boxes.
Yeah. That's great. I'm going to open it up to our first question from the audience in this section. This is Jillian from Jillian, and she wants to know, how do you build a follow-up plan with your attendees, both virtual and physical, to really keep them engaged, and both from how do you keep them engaged digitally, and how do you keep them engaged physically? And I love hearing the sounds in the background for authenicity's sake. So Jessica, why don't we start with you on this?
Sure. So, I think one of the things that we've always done with our events is a post-event survey. And so what we try to do is follow up immediately with any questions that people might have. So we launched an event this year tied to a new product that we have. And the feedback was, this content was really interesting, but I want to go under the hood with the product a bit more. So we tried to turn around demo videos very quickly and kind of share in our follow-ups. Based on attendee feedback, we think that this might be of interest. We talked about the collaboration across teams. So I think really using a lot more of our content that aligns with, hey, you were interested enough to attend this event on X, and we have more recommendations of things that you might be interested in. And then I think the last one I'll mention, an event series that we launched this year for new clients, just following up with milestones that we're going to be checking in with them and, trying to create that micro community and also letting them know, like, this experience doesn't end here. We want to know how you're progressing, how things are going, how, whether you're still in touch with other connections you've made.
And Sarah, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, your enablement kit, to Jessica's point, has to be pretty extensive for both sales and for marketing. Mm-hmm. And it needs to include, here's the blog, here's the article that's been written, here's the customer story, here's the video that you can go watch. That's the great opportunity to use those 30 to 60 second videos to incorporate them in. And then it's also what we love to do too, if we're doing panels or an interview and we don't get to all the questions, oftentimes we'll record a short follow-up video with the person and have them just lightning round the remaining questions so that we can forward that out to the audience. And that way they know that you asked this question, we made sure we got it answered for you.
I love that idea.
Awesome. So we're going to start going through more of the questions from the audience here in our final minutes. I do want to point out there was a great comment in the chat by Lauren. And Lauren's talking about, look, we're going through this phase where we had to take a risk and evolve over the last 15 months with our virtual strategy. And look how much improvement has been made in such a short time. We're about to go through that next phase, whether it's 15 months or even compressed from before. I think that's just a great point. And I don't know if Sarah or Jessica, you want to talk a little bit about like risk and innovation, particularly in, enterprise organization like yours, and how you actually get stakeholders and C-level executives to kind of buy in with the need to be agile in this moment.
So I think, what I've experienced with event professionals I've worked with is we all are a little bit type A and detail obsessed, and which makes us great event professionals, but sometimes also means that taking a risk feels really scary. Mm-hmm. I think that the benefit to virtual has been, since these events are lower cost, we have been able to experiment a little bit more. We canceled our last event the day of March 2020, and I think 2 or 3 weeks later, we're inviting that same group of people to experience what we had planned to do in person through a virtual event. So I think that a lot of it is constant trial and error, and being comfortable, or as comfortable as possible with that risk. Our executive team has actually been very open to, just especially given all of the circumstances, like testing out what works, figuring out what size of events, what types of experiences, what it means to do a virtual conference. So I think that, it's a lot of times it's just being okay ourselves with knowing that, this is what we're trying to do, and it might work out perfectly, or it might be very different than what we expected.
And you're so right. Like, I would joke with my team that I felt like I had so much more control in the physical space, where if a mic stops working, you just flag someone, and there's someone backstage is bringing you a new mic. It's, PowerPoint presentations stop working, and that's okay. You just, put something else up on screen. But in this digital space, I'll be perfectly honest, the technology wasn't there 15 months ago to make most of us feel comfortable with what we were doing with our virtual events. And the fact that, as technologists, take Socialive, take Bizzabo, y'all came to our rescue. So big props to the fact that you innovated so quickly, so hard to make it that we could take risks. And we were very fortunate at Zendesk, very similar to Movable Ink, where our CEO said to us early on, he's like, I don't want you to do what everybody else is doing. And I don't want you just to lead for leads. So figure out how to create something really cool and awesome that people want to attend, and the leads will come. And having that permission, we just ran with it.
Love it.
We've done live events where a celebrity has terrible internet, or even though they promised us they were going to be, in a
Social hardwired
location, stuff like it just happens.
Yeah.
And we've been very transparent and open with our audience to say, hey, we tried this, it didn't work so well, but guess what? Now we've got this new piece of technology and we're going to try this again. So hang in there with us. And they have.
And we're all evolving so fast. On the technology side, the Bizzabo folks would say the same. On the Socialive side, we are trying to evolve quickly to kind of meet the needs, because it really is a new normal, and the paradigm has shifted for permanent, I would say, in some ways. So I want to make sure we get to some of the great questions that have been upvoted in the chat section. So I'm going to go through these one by one, and hopefully we'll get through at least a few of them in the time remaining, because they are great questions. This one, the first one is from Husvini. And Husvini was asking, her company is trying to really define what is a hybrid event in kind of this new phase, and what components need to be in a hybrid event to kind of make it a hybrid event. So Jessica, can you take that?
Sure. Yeah. I think that for us, as I mentioned, hybrid will mean two different things. One is our entire strategy is hybrid. But I think in terms of actually, it being that event, again, if you want it to be an event, there has to be some incentive to attend live and to experience that. So I think that sometimes, that's the live stream, the production, the technology. Sometimes that's mailing an event kit to someone to make sure that they feel like they're part of the day, even though they're not in a physical location. We've tried to, at least as we're looking towards the future, figure out whether we can send people seamless gift cards, or whether there's ways that we can just try to replicate some of those small little touches to make it closer to what they're going to experience in person. And I've seen with conferences that we've previously sponsored, they're testing, very small groups in person and really trying to optimize for that at-home experience too. So I don't know.
Awesome. And hybrid seems to be a hot topic, because the next question is also a hybrid events question from Adelina, which is, how do you think about branding a hybrid event? Is it different than are the physical and virtual events branded differently in any way? Jessica, again, I give you a chance to talk about this.
Yeah, so I think we rebranded, our conference is called Think Summit. And so when we took it virtual, we called it Rethink. Just as kind of a play on, that it's the same event. But I think it's probably important to, keep that consistent. As Sarah said before, people don't think that they're attending a hybrid event. They think they're attending it digitally, or they're attending it in person. But I think if you're creating disparate brands, you're just going to create extra work for yourself unnecessarily.
Got it. Okay, it's great. We have another great question. This is from Carolyn. And Carolyn is talking about conversion rates of events, and say early in 2020, conversion rates, the industry was talking about 50% conversion rates on virtual events. And then the feeling is, with kind of Zoom fatigue setting in, those numbers are beginning to dip, potentially even down to 30% in terms of conversion rate. What are your thoughts on this in terms of conversion rate? Are there ways to kind of combat those declining conversion rates? Sarah, can you kick us off?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to make sure you're segmenting correctly. We have to stop just trying to invite every single person in our database to every event. It's like, what is the purpose of the event? Who needs to be there and why? And segment accordingly. And I bet you those conversion rates are going to go back up again. Also, make sure you're counting in your on-demand views. So on-demand views should count with your full conversion. So it's like, yes, there is the registration, there's the day of attending, but yes, also watch your long tail of on-demand.
Yeah, and we've started to see, our conversion rates dip a little bit. I also think that it's important to make sure you're following up before the event. Make sure that your internal teams are enabled to understand exactly, as Sarah said, who's most important. And if you have like 10 prospects or 10 clients, what's the most important experience for them to have? We've also tried things, day before, if our registration rates are low or people aren't confirming, like let's try to send them, again, a virtual coffee or just a touch point that makes, tries to incentivize them to understand, like, we do want them to come, and them being there is important for us. And it's not just kind of like, hey, I registered for this thing that I might attend, I might not.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the questions today, but they were incredible ones. So we want to thank the audience for incredible engagement and just really insightful questions. And what an amazing panel. Sarah and Jessica, you guys are fantastic. Your insights are remarkable. And also you can articulate it so well. So thank you so much for being part of it. And also thanks for allowing me to be part of the conversation in some way.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm going to pass it back to Brandon now to help wrap up the show. Thanks again.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David. And again, huge thanks to Sarah and Jessica for joining us today. And thank you all for attending. We got a ton of questions. I'm glad we were able to get around to so many of them throughout the discussion today, but your participation was key to making this happen. So we look forward to keeping in touch with you and shaping the future of events together. As a reminder, we will be emailing out the on-demand recording of this webinar along with the event feedback survey. So look for that in your inboxes, and please complete that survey so that we can make events like this even more impactful for you all moving forward. All right, that's a wrap. Thank you all and have a great day.